So, my good friend, Dr. Carl Petrazzo, welcome back.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I know I was inundating you a little bit with questions and stuff that I was always curious about, from a psychological standpoint. Not only I respect your professional opinion, but I trust you. So it's not like going to just a random psychologist. I know you're going to give me the real truth. So one of the question, well, about two or three more I have. One is, let's say, must you be sane for the death penalty to be carried out?
Well, that's an interesting contradiction, but it's quite true. You actually do. They cannot execute a person who is insane, who doesn't know what's going on. In order to be executed, you have to be sane. So if a person is, schizophrenic and hearing voices and seeing things, and they have no idea of what's going on or what's happening, you can't execute that person. That's considered inhumane. So before a person gets executed, if there's a question as to their sanity, you have to do an evaluation to make sure that they do understand what's going on.
Okay, so I got a question. Let's say you got a guy, girl, whatever. They're in for a violent crime or something that they want to give them the death penalty. If they're on let's say they have a depression problem, they're on some antidepressant, does that preclude them from getting the death penalty?
Well, no, it wouldn't, because the medication would, it would make them sane, because the medication is helping them to be sane. So the fact that they're on a medication doesn't preclude them from getting the death penalty. I mean, I testified in a case in which the question was mitigating circumstances regarding the death penalty. And in this case, the question of mitigating circumstances was, could post-traumatic stress syndrome, in other words, if the defendant had been abused as a child, would that be a factor in the fact that they committed a heinous crime of violence on another person? And I testified that, yeah, that could be the case. But that was whether or not the person should be committed to the death sentence versus life in prison. So you can also have that kind of a question as well.
In your opinion, don't you think life in prison is worse than the death penalty?
Well, I hear that all the time. I don't know if I personally believe that. I mean, I guess I've been kind of a death penalty person, but now everyone that I talk to is telling me, no, not only is it inhumane, but actually life in prison is worse. But when you look at what happened in California recently, where this guy who kidnapped and raped 16 children and was given, 3 life sentences, and now the parole board is saying, well, let's let him out back on the streets. That kind of then raises the question, okay, if you're going to have life in prison, then have life in prison. Don't begin to use life in prison as a means of keeping in people in jail a long time and then releasing them.
Wow. I guess what about a person using a defense as sleepwalking?
Well, that has had
like a consciously surveying area.
I wrote a book on dream interpretations, and so it's an area I'm very familiar with. And I spoke on this case and at one point, not testified in the case, but spoke about it. When you sleepwalk, usually what you expect is a person to be sort of like in a trance, or like a zombie, or like hypnotized. And in this particular case, and I actually don't remember the name of the case, there's a very famous case in Arizona where the man killed his wife and put up the sleepwalking defense. And what happened, there was a part of this in the process of killing her where it was near the pool. and he had a knife, and he stabbed her. And he was at the pool, and a neighbor heard something and looked out the window. And the neighbor noticed that he looked around to see what was going on. And that testimony caused him to be found guilty, because what happened was the sleep experts, some of them testified that, and I think that's correct, that if a person is sleepwalking, you're in a sort of a trance-like state. You're not going to consciously look around to see if people catch you at what you're doing.
To see your surroundings.
You're just sleepwalking. So that he lost on that particular grounds. But there also have been successful defenses where people have committed murder during sleepwalking and have been exonerated.
Really?
Yes. Yeah, because there is such a thing.
I always looked at sleepwalking like it's not possible.
No, it definitely is a reality. Sleepwalking is a real thing. And some people sleepwalk, they'll get up and they'll actually cook a meal and eat the meal and go back to bed, all while sleepwalking.
Is that sleepwalking, or is that just getting some? I mean, you're hungry. You just
An excuse for a midnight snack?
Yeah.
No, there is such a thing as sleepwalking, and yes, it can be. Some people, one of the cases, the individual got in his car, drove to, I don't know if it was his mother-in-law or not. I'm recalling now cases that I've read. Killed the mother-in-law, got back in the car and went back home, and did get off on the sleepwalking defense. Now, of course, this person had a history of sleepwalking. So it's not like, in order to have a sleepwalking defense, you have to show several things. A history of sleepwalking, person has gotten treatment for it, it's happened before. So you can't take a one-off and say, oh, I did this and I was sleepwalking.
Okay, so I got a question. How does a person develop a history of sleepwalking? Like, in other words, there's got to be that first time the person slept walk. Slept walk. I don't know what the past tense is, right? Okay, let's say, for example, right? I go home tonight. I get up. I go eat whatever leftovers in the refrigerator. I chalk it up. Oh, I was sleepwalking. So what do? I go, how do I know I was sleepwalking? Do I go to the doctor the next day and say, hey, I was sleepwalking, that's why I ate last night? Am I aware that I sleptwalked?
You may not be aware of it, no.
Who catches you that you're sleepwalking?
Usually someone else. But remember, for sleepwalking, as I said, it can't be a one-off. Usually there's a whole history of the person having sleep disorders, because sleep disorders are disorders of the brain. Sleeping is something that our brain controls. So when we have a disorder that's related to sleep, such as sleepwalking, that's considered a medical condition.
Right, but now, okay, it's a medical condition, right? But let's say the first time a person sleepwalks, right? Somebody has to witness that person sleepwalking and then report it, and then that's how he gets diagnosed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, if you get up and then what do you look like when you're sleepwalking? That's the thing. Like if a person gets up and cooks a meal, they got to have their eyes open. They got to,
Mm-hmm.
Why would that person that's watching them, like, I guess what I'm getting at is, if, let's say, somebody watched me get up, cook, eat, and then go back to bed, and I look normal, my eyes are open, I'm doing everything, I'm functioning, right? Why would they say, oh, he's just sleepwalking?
Well, because there's a sense that the person is not aware really of what they're doing. It's almost like they're doing things automatically by habit. They're not really like, if you walk into a room, they're not aware of everybody in the room. They're, zombie-like is not quite a way to put it, but or hypnotized-like. They're not really aware of what's going on around them. So they don't have that awareness.
So,
It's kind of an automatic behavior that they're doing.
Okay, but as far as the way they look, doesn't have to look like they're actually sleeping.
No, they don't have their eyes closed. So, their eyes are open.
So anybody could say they were sleepwalking, use that as an excuse.
Well, they try to. But as I say, first of all, if there's no history, it's very unusual for that to happen, particularly in a case where there's homicide or a crime involved, to use that as a defense. Because the first thing they're going to say is, well, as a child, did you have sleep problems? Did you have sleepwalking previously? Were you ever treated for any sleep disorders? If none of those exist, that alone throws into question whether or not the person was actually sleepwalking.
Right, but now do you diagnose someone sleepwalking without witnessing them sleepwalking, just because somebody said they were sleepwalking?
If there's like a medical or a medical history or history of witnesses that have been written down, you can review that. Also, a lot of times what they do in those cases is they'll put people in a sleep lab where they are recording all their brain activity.
I've been to a sleep lab for sleep apnea.
Okay. So then they'll put and watch their different brain activity as well. So there are people that testify in court. I have not. There are people who testify in court as to whether or not a person was sleepwalking, not because they actually saw that person sleepwalking, but based on reports of other people, based on medical records, based on sleep lab records, that kind of thing. Yeah.
That's exactly what they did to me. Well, not exactly, but when I went for a sleep apnea test, they hooked me up from not on my face, my chest, and, they hook you up with all these wires and stuff, and it's just to study your sleep pattern. Because sleep apnea, you don't breathe. Like your breath will stop, That's when they prescribe a machine. You have to sleep with a sleep apnea machine because you're not getting any REM sleep. In other words, you're sleeping, but you're not really getting any deep REM is what gives you the rest. Right. But I had no idea that sleepwalking was, that someone would have it's comical. Like somebody would say, yeah, I was sleepwalking.
Oh, it's been used successfully several times as a defense where the person was found not guilty due to sleepwalking.
What? So what is the sleep apnea?
Well, that's a completely different thing. That has nothing to do.
I'm not asking because I'm planning a defense. Just put that on record.
Sleep apnea is an entirely different thing. Insomnia is an entirely different thing. There's different forms of insomnia. There's narcolepsy where you fall asleep while, in the middle of conversations. Sleep in general is a brain activity. So anything that affects sleep relates to activity of the brain.
I want to circle back around to that. Can you tell me what I always wanted to know was personality disorder versus schizophrenia versus bipolar, like that irresistible impulse?
For example, with a personality disorder, it's very hard to put up a defense of either not knowing the difference between right and wrong or having an irresistible impulse. Because a personality disorder means that you're able to function in life, except that you have a pattern of behavior that can be very self-defeating or annoying to other people. But you're still able to function in life. That's what a personality. Obsessive compulsive, you wash your hands all the time.
Right, but now it goes back to who's to say? Personality disorder, a personality that annoys people. Who's to say that's annoying?
Oh, who's to say it's annoying?
Right.
Well, other people.
Right, so here's the thing, and Like, in other words,
Well, or let me put it this way. The people that say it's annoying are the people that live with the other person. So other people will say this person's hard to work with. The wife will say this person's hard to deal with. The kids will say, so the people in the circle of that person's world will all agree that they've got this pattern of behavior.
like a, like a what do you call like an intervention type thing.
Mm-hmm.
But now what happens when that person's in that environment with those people and they all agree that, hey, we're going to have an intervention that, he keeps doing this and keeps doing that. But then he goes and gets another girlfriend or whatever. And to that girl, he's totally normal.
It doesn't. That's true, but it usually doesn't happen that way.
Eventually.
If it's a personality disorder, eventually the issue will reappear in a new relationship.
So it's not if, it's when.
It's an ingrained pattern of behavior. And the difficulty in treating personality disorders is that the person doesn't really feel that they need to change because it's their personality. So,
Right.
If
They're
you
like,
say...
right, like, what's your problem?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you say, a lot of you see in the press now has to do with narcissism. So if you say, boy, this person is so entitled. Narcissism means I'm entitled. I'm entitled to the chair at the head of the table. I'm entitled to the boss to treat me right. I'm entitled to my wife to do certain things. I'm entitled. And so everybody says this person is really so entitled. But the person themselves may say, well, no, I'm not entitled. I'm just me. I'm just, and so they're not motivated to change, even though that pattern of behavior, they say, well, how come I can't hold on to relationships? Well, you can't hold on to relationships because eventually the other person gets tired of you, always acting like you're right and and et cetera. But the person with the disorder doesn't see that.
Of course not, yeah.
So those are very hard to say irresistible impulse or didn't know the difference. And there's a whole obsessive, paranoid, borderline, narcissistic. Those are all personality disorders.
Can a personality disorder be fixed?
It's very hard because the person doesn't feel they have a disorder. They don't feel they need treatment. So how do you fix it?
Let's say he gets that intervention and for whatever reason he agrees with them and says, okay, you guys are right. Can it be fixed?
If he says, yes, you're right, and I think I should change what I'm doing. But it's not the same as like an alcohol or drug intervention. An alcohol or drug intervention, the change is you have to do this external thing. It's not something you have to change within yourself.
Right.
I mean, whatever changes you need to make in yourself, it's only part of you no longer drinking. So we know what the change is. That's different than owning up to something within yourself and saying, I need to change.
So I'm taking it as there's a lot of people out there with personality disorders that are never going to change.
Yes, that's very true. Absolutely.
Explains why people don't get along.
Well, it's part of it for sure. Yes.
So then the schizophrenia, does it fall into the same category as paranoia?
No, first of all, there's paranoid personality. So there's people that are highly suspicious by their nature, and it restricts them in life because they never trust anyone else. I mean, to the degree that is my neighbor listening to what I'm saying, or paranoia in schizophrenia usually will have to do with grand conspiracies. People from outer space are tapping my phones. I was kidnapped and someone put a mechanism in my brain and they can listen to everything I'm thinking.
That's schizophrenia.
That's schizophrenia.
Something that's really nuts.
Exactly.
Like something that we know is not realistic.
Yes, exactly. I hear things in my ears, and what I hear is the Russians are trying to tell me to do things. Those kinds of things are schizophrenia.
So when you hear, let's say a person,
That, by the way, for the courts, now you're getting closer to not knowing the difference between right and wrong or irresistible impulse. Now you're a little closer to being able to argue that.
okay, so now is it true that, let's say, for example, when people say, oh, I hear voices, okay? The voice that your mind is telling you, like that negative tape that's running in your head, you heard the term negative tape. I learned that in therapy with EMDR. You know what EMDR is, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's to erase your negative tape because you have this negative tape playing in your head. And when a certain incident happens or a certain thing triggers it, that tape is always playing.
Mm-hmm.
EMDR, what it does, it'll erase that tape, leaves you with a clean slate, where you almost forget, it's erased. That negative tape, the point I was trying to make was, let's say, for example, does it erase the paranoia, schizophrenia? They both can run parallel to each other.
Well, the difference is that in schizophrenia, you think that the voice is something foreign. You don't identify it as your own thoughts.
Okay, so here's my point. What I was trying to say: 2 ways to hear voices. 1, your own thoughts, that negative tape that's running, or 2, you think someone's actually talking to you, like behind your ear or something, saying something. What is the difference between the 2?
Well, that's very hard to explain because we don't have any tapes of how it sounds to people when they hear voices. We don't really know. But what we do know is that they're identifying the voices as foreign, as something outside of them that's talking to them. Now, could it be their own voice? Could it be their own tapes that it's their own thinking? And they identify their own thoughts as being foreign, as being planted, as coming from someone else.
Right, but now that's the difference of a patient telling you, I'm hearing voices. I would think the next question you're going to ask them is, like, where are you hearing these voices? It's someone, you felt coming from the outside talking? Was it something that you were thinking?
Well, they can't identify it as something. They can't make that distinction. To them, it's something from the outside.
From the outside. But now, does that diagnose them as crazy or not crazy, depending on what voice they hear?
As schizophrenia. And then there's all kinds of voices. Like you can be in a manic state where you feel like the voice of God is said that you're a very special person, you're a prophet, or you're something of that nature. So depending on the type of schizophrenia, the voices will be different. Some people have very grand voices telling them very grandiose things. You're a special person. God has anointed you. You must go out into the world. You must kill 3 people today in order to make up. God wants 3 sacrifices today. Now you're getting closer to a forensic issue of, at the time of the crime, was this person insane? See, that now you're getting closer to being able to argue that. Well, irresistible impulse, did they know the difference between right and wrong? Well, if their voices were telling them to do it and they believe all of this, then probably they did not know the difference between right and wrong. So you're getting closer to being able to argue that.
I guess one of the most common terms you hear is bipolar.
Yes.
I was away with a guy in Otisville. His name was Vinny Zappola. Vinny Zappola was a made guy in the Lucchese family. He was an uncle to my captain, George Zappola. Now, George Zappola I was very close with. He was my captain in the family. He was the one who sponsored me to the gas pipe. Anthony Casso, who you heard of, right? Never met Vinny. All I did was hear about Vinny. Vinny was part of a group called the Bypass Gang. They used to steal banks. And how they did it was they used to bypass the alarm system. And it was Gas Pipe was the one who was the head of the Bypass Gang. Vinny Zappola was part of that gang, and Vinny Zappola ultimately got arrested for it, and he was in jail for a while. So all I hear about is Vinny Zappola, great guy, stand-up guy, Georgie Neck's uncle. You know, his brother was Georgie Neck's father who was killed. They chopped his head off, the father. It rolled up on a shore. That's how they found his father's head. Sad story, right? Anyway, he's in Otisville. I go into Otisville, and I wound up cellmates with Vinny Zappola. He would be in a conversation, and he did this with everybody. It would be a random conversation, just a normal thing, and then he would get so hyped up about something to where his lip would shake, and he would start turning like red and purple. Almost to the point like you're like, wait a sec, what the, like it didn't warrant you to get that excited about what we're talking about. We could be talking right here, right now, and all of a sudden he may disagree with something, or maybe something triggers him, and all of a sudden he gets like, you see him getting this manic, you know, to a point where a lot of guys used to check him and say, hey, the fuck, what's your problem? Like, what are you making faces for? He did it to me a few times, and I was taken back, because you're taken back the first time around when somebody does that. You're looking at him and going, fuck, I didn't say anything to you that was that, for you to get that, you know, hyped up about. And then somebody pulled me on the side and said, you know, he's bipolar. You know, a lot of times he would, his job was to sweep the tier, and you would see him sweeping the tier. But then there was times you would see him walking around with no broom, imaginary, like, sweeping. You know, so the guy was like highs and lows, like, you know, like, is that a bipolar?
Well, there's a couple of things there that you could say about that. I mean, one of them is, you know, was that a rage response? Did he have trouble managing anger and rage? And that could be related to bipolar. You know, being triggered, having rage responses, and feeling like you're unable to control the feeling that you're having, so you sort of shake. It could just be excitement, getting excited about something that doesn't make sense to be that excited. When you say that he would walk around and, you know, have the broom for pretend, that sounds like even some form of a little bit of being out of contact with reality, or a schizophrenic kind of thing. Was he taking medications, you know?
Quietly. You know, he would go on, tell everybody he was going to get his blood pressure pills, but he was on some kind of psychotropic medication.
Okay.
But nobody liked the guy.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody liked him. I think he would have got punched in his face, or something would have happened to him, had he not been Georgie Neck's uncle.
Why did nobody like him? I mean, was it just?
I don't want to say like a dislike. I want to say like he big for that reason. He would have a one-on-one conversation, let's say with you, right? And all of a sudden, whatever you're talking about. I'm not just saying like, you know, he would talk about, you know, certain subjects and stuff, and then he would get all like, you know, lip would start shaking and like almost like turn into a different person. And you get insulted by it because you say, hey, what, you know what I'm saying? Like, you know when you're talking to somebody and their face gets twisted and they're upset at you for something, and then you're looking at them saying, wait a second, I didn't say anything for you to be upset about. So then you get offended, and then, you know, it escalates, right? Well, I think a lot of people talked behind his back. Nobody really wanted to bother with the guy for that reason. Like, in other words, they knew that whatever company they kept with the guy was going to be limited, and they didn't want to, like, you know, hang with him for, you know, more than like 5 or 10 minutes, get into conversation with him, because, you know, it's annoying. Somebody keeps doing that. And you have to show a certain amount of respect, because the guy was made. So he was a wise guy, right? So it's like you get another wise guy who doesn't want to get into that, you know, So I think they kind of, I don't want to say avoided, they just avoided those long conversations because this guy's in the can, you know, we're locked up together, right? We could talk for hours. You know, some guys you just really connect with and you're compatible with. When I think about it, nobody connected with him like that. Nobody could sit and have a conversation with him for like an hour or two without him getting all, you know, hyped up about something. And he got away with a lot. He got away with a lot in there because I still think till today, I'll say it till today, because of his nephew and because he had a relationship with Vic and Gaspipe and those guys, the Brooklyn faction, the Lucchese family, they kind of like, you know, all right, they just, well, if they probably got a picture of Vinny Zappola, not George Zappola, but his uncle, Vinny Zappola. He wasn't stupid. The guy was a jailhouse lawyer. I mean, I learned a lot from Vinny as far as the federal guidelines and stuff. He would go into the law library. He would really study the law. He had a guideline book. So he was very smart when it came to like, you know, the guy was no dummy, you know, but he just couldn't control his emotions.